The water hid history. James hung in the depths, holding the torch in one hand and slowly adjusting his movement with the other so as not to hit the rusty hull of the sunken ship. Enormous, covered in moss and coral, the ship lay on the seabed, its dark holes gaping like mouths awaiting guests. There were different stories about this ship. They said that the crew had disappeared without a trace, that distress signals had been sent out but no one had come to help, that when it was found drifting in the open ocean it was empty. But James considered all these stories just legends. After all, it was just a sunken ship. Carefully making his way to the hole in the hull, he turned on the torch and peered inside. A black corridor covered in silt stretched ahead, and the walls were hidden in darkness. He took a deep breath through his breathing apparatus and swam inside. The ship was waiting for him. There was an unnatural silence inside the ship. The water was murky. The flashlight picked out rusty walls covered in a patina of time. James swam carefully, making sure not to touch the crumbling debris, and carefully studied the corridor. The watch on his wrist had stopped. That was the first thing he noticed. Its hands were frozen at 3:12. James frowned, tapped his finger on the glass, but the mechanism did not move. He looked at the computer attached to his wrist, but the screen was dark. The feeling of unease was growing. At the end of the corridor, he saw a door. The captain's cabin. It was slightly open and the frozen stream of water gently rocked the door, creating the illusion of breathing. James slowly approached and looked inside. The table was untouched. On it stood a cup with black sediment inside, covered in a layer of algae. The documents floated in the water, but their edges were not soaked, as if time had stopped right there. He turned on the flashlight to maximum brightness and directed the beam into the depths of the cabin. And then he saw them. Figures standing in the corners of the room, darker than the water, motionless, and watching him. His heart sank. His chest was squeezed by pressure, but he knew it was not water. It was them. The crew, who never left the ship. The light of the flashlight flickered. The figures shifted. James turned and swam back, but the corridor he had come down had disappeared. There was only darkness before him now. Panic struck his chest, but James forced himself not to breathe faster. There was enough air in the tank, but now he understood it did not matter. He swam back to where a second ago there had been an exit, but the corridor had changed. The walls were closing in. The passage was becoming narrower, turning into a tight living cage. The flashlight flickered again. The shadows in the cabin were moving. They were closer. He heard a whisper, though it was impossible. The words were muffled, as if the voice was coming through the thickness of water. "You're one of us now." James turned, desperately kicking his fins, but the current held him in place. He tried to reach for the exit, but his body did not obey. The light in his helmet began to dim. His hands were covered in black ripples. His skin became transparent, dissolving in the water. He was disappearing, becoming part of this place. When the rescue team found his gear, it was floating in the void. The suit was gone, the regulator still worked, but there was no trace of James himself. And in the captain's cabin, among the dust and sand, there was now a new shadow. And if you stared long enough at the broken windows of the ship, you could see a new face among the crew. Someone who had once tried to leave, but remained forever.